So what we don't want to do is turn people like a refrigerator when we're trying to reestablish movement. Good morning. Happy Monday. I have Neural Coffee in hand and it is perfect. All right. This is going to be a busy week. The Intensive 14 starts this week. It's actually on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to that. So let's dig right into today's Q&A. This is with Charlie. Charlie's fairly new. I saw him sneaking in on one of the Coffee and Coaches Conference calls last week. So he's had a few exposures and he's figuring some stuff out on his own, which is great. But he asked some really good foundational questions in this Q&A that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from. We touched on foundational archetypes. We touched on right oblique orientation, dirty measures on the table. So we talked a little bit about that, about how these things can change using the table as your constraint and point of reference. So very important call, probably for a lot of people. I think you'll benefit. If you'd like to participate in a 15-minute consultation, please go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com. Put 15-minute consultation in the subject line, and please include your question in the email, and we will arrange that at our mutual convenience. Everybody have an outstanding Monday, happy intensive week, and I'll see you tomorrow. All right, Charlie, we got the video rolling. Clock has started. What is your question?
Bill, I don't know if you have that chessboard that I emailed through.
I do, and I'll put it up here on the video for everybody to see.
Okay. I was wondering if I could just go through what my interpretations was, and you could maybe guide me and see if I was on the right track.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. So it's just starting off, got a wide infrasternal angle, so it's on with a exhaled axial skeleton and bias with reductions in flexion, abduction, and ER across the limbs. So see in the pelvis, we've got a restriction in internal rotation as well. I understand the common compensation we have is a concentric orientation of the posterior lowered musculature at the pelvis. That's how I understand that.
So that would actually limit that's going to limit the early flexion measures. Okay, that's it's actually representative of a the posterior lower compression limits the ER and the flexion in front of you. Okay, so it moves external rotation from in front of you out to the side. That's what that posterior lower represents.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're getting more ER space and you're using up the IR space that you have.
It's out there. It's actually less ER space. So you don't have any ER space in front of you. It's moved out to the side. So it's moved away from midline. That's what you want to understand about that. It's the anterior compressive strategy that's going to limit the internal rotation. Okay, so what it's showing you is that you've got a tremendous amount of A to P. So when you get that posterior lower compressive strategy, the thing that happened just prior to that is the anterior compressive strategy. Okay, that's why we talk about these things in a little bit of a sequence, because it allows us to see how these superficial strategies are layered upon the axial skeleton. Okay. Mm-hmm. So don't misrepresent what they're showing you. Okay.
Yep.
When you have posterior lower compressive strategy, okay, you lose early traditional hip flexion, if we want to call it that. You're going to lose the straight leg raise is going to be limited, and then you're going to lose IR, not because of the posterior compressive strategy, but because of what just happened prior to that, which would be the anterior compression. Okay. Just so you understand, okay? There's a sequence of events that those things represent, but it tells us where you are in space. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing, okay?
Okay, so is that an extra step between the inhalation bias strategy that comes with the exhalation bias on the
It's not extra. It's just part of the sequential layering of superficial strategies on top of the axial skeleton. Okay, there's
Okay.
there's a typical representation of the archetypes. Okay, and I think you understand that. What you have to understand is that the superficial strategies are going to appear in a relative specific sequence of events based on where your center of gravity is over your feet. Okay,
Yeah.
when you see posterior lower compression, so your early flexion measures, if you look at the chessboard, the early flexion measures are very limited. So your hip flexion is limited, your straight leg raise is limited. So right away you go, uh-oh, we got a posterior lower compressive strategy. If you have a posterior lower compressive strategy, you have all the other superficial strategies in play already, because the last one to get layered on is posterior lower.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's what I want you to understand about this. Okay. Your assumption. So in your email, your assumption that this chessboard represents a right oblique representation is correct. So this is somebody that's tipping on a much more oblique axis as they are turning. Okay, and that would be represented by your ER measures. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when you see the deficit of ER on the right side greater than the left side, you can make the assumption that you're on the right oblique. When you see the limitation of straight leg raise and early hip flexion, that means you're pushed forward. Okay. So you tipped on the right oblique first. Okay. Mm-hmm. Tipped on the right oblique first, and then got pushed farther forward. So the center of gravity is way over to the right and way forward. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is that oblique axis shifts something that that comes really early in the progression?
For a wide ISA, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So one thing that I've been struggling to understand is the increase of ER at the shoulder.
Okay.
Is that from just my research this afternoon, just going through videos? I got a clue that could have been the anterior compressive strategy pulling the sternum down, which
okay, that would be a restriction of internal rotation of the shoulder if the sternum is pushed down. Do this for me. Put your arm up in like a 90-degree angle there. There you go. Perfect. Now, don't change the shoulder orientation. Just bend backwards. Did your hand go back too?
Yeah.
Does that make it look like there's more external rotation?
Yep.
Okay. Was it more external rotation in the shoulder?
Not relative.
No, that is correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you see a magnification, so your ERs match.
Yeah.
Okay, in your shoulder and your hip, which means that you should know already before you even measure somebody. It's like, I know that unless there's a constraint problem, like if you tore a labrum or something like that, then that changes the rules a little bit because the constraints have changed. But when you're measuring somebody, if you measure an ER, you should have a similar limitation in ER in the ipsilateral extremity. Okay, but it looks like you don't. It looks like, wow, we've got a lot, especially on the one side, it looks like, wow, we've got a lot of ER, don't we? But the reality is that if you're anteriorly oriented and I lay you on a table, so the table becomes a constraint. So if you lay on the table and then you roll backwards on the table, as many people do, okay, you don't see the restriction of ER in the table measure, right? But the magnification tells us that chances are you fell backwards on the table. Mm-hmm. Like I said, assuming all the constraints are intact.
Yep.
Okay. Because you do have situations where you'll have like this one outlier measure, like everything matches, and then you see this like crazy kind of like an external rotation that'll show up, like cricket bowlers, baseball pitchers, and stuff like that. They have a lot of rollback on the table. Like they all roll back on the table, which gives them a truly magnified ER representation. They get twists and bones that magnify the ER. So there's a lot of stuff that you kind of need to know under those circumstances. But typically what you're looking at here is you're looking at a layback on the table. The layback is actually more in this situation on the you're going to see more of the right-sided, correct? We saw more on the right. Yeah, we saw more on the right than we did on the left, because when you're laying on the table, the left side of your body is probably not touching the table.
Okay.
Relative to the right side.
Yep.
So you're kind of measuring like this.
Okay.
Get it?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So it's sneaky. It's sneaky, but if you understand what the possibilities are, then it helps you figure out your chessboards, right?
Okay.
Yeah. As I say, all measurements are dirty, which means that the whole body is represented in each of your measures. So let me give you another for instance. So when you look at the shoulder internal rotation measure on the left side, right? Which you got a pretty decent measure there compared to what your left hip was representing, right? So the left hip IR is only like 5, and you get 60 IR in the shoulder, and you go, what the heck's going on there? Well, if you're laying on the table and you're twisted this way, guess what? My neck is turning this way, right? My lower cervical spine is going this way. That's going to magnify your internal rotation measurement of your shoulder, because you're not measuring just shoulder motion, you're measuring internal rotation. Right. And so if that spine's turning away, that magnifies your internal rotation measure. Okay. So again, that's how you identify these things.
And it's the hip is an easier, it's more of a true representation because it's harder to cheat.
What's heavier? Yeah. So always remember that you're measuring in reference to the table. It's like the arm really doesn't weigh as much as the leg does. And so if you had like a big gigantic arm on one side and a normal size arm on the other side, right? Chances are, if you tried to internally rotate it with a big giant arm, it wouldn't have turned the spine nearly as much. And so you would have a measurement that would be more representative of a limitation. So again, it's like what's moving as you perform these measures. When you bring the leg up over the hip and it pushes the hip into the table, you'll get a truer representation of the limitation of internal rotation. The arm being lighter, everything just kind of turns with it. That's how you got to discern these things, right? Okay. Whenever you're measuring a limb, you're measuring the entire body moving. The question mark is how much does the hip move? How much does the one side of the pelvis move? How much does the spine move as you're performing these measures? That's how we figure this stuff out. Does that make sense?
I think so. So with the weight shifted forward anteriorly, is that representative in a anterior pelvic orientation? Is that
well? You have an anterior orientation for sure based on your measures, right? So your hip ER measures give you that piece of information. Okay, so you know that you're forward. The lack of IR, the limited straight leg raise, again, that's a push forward. So you're moving towards a later representation of propulsion. So you're farther forward. You're trying to get past middle, trying to get into a late representation there. That's what this. Okay.
So the first step would be to bring that back.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Always. If you take somebody that's on an oblique, on an oblique turn, okay, and then pushed forward, if you try to turn them back to the left, all you do is turn everything at the same time, because you don't have relative movement available to you. So you try to push, and like I said, I always talk about, you ever move a refrigerator out of a corner?
I can imagine.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're not old enough to own your own refrigerator? Is that what the deal is?
Pretty much, yeah.
When you move, so back in the olden days before you were born, refrigerators didn't have wheels. They were just on legs. And so you have to move one side at a time, kind of a thing, right? And so what we don't want to do is turn people like a refrigerator when we're trying to reestablish movement. So you need to bring them back so you can recapture some of the relative motions that should be available in the pelvis itself. So now we want relative motion in the pelvis. Then we have actually the capacity to make a turn. Until then, you don't. You're just
and I'll know that when I have the ERs normalized.
So think about the ones, all the measures that are representative of that push forward need to improve, right? So the straight leg raise should improve. The straight leg raise should improve. Early hip flexion should improve. IR should improve. ER should improve. Okay. Yeah. That's how you know. That's how you know. Okay. All right. We are unfortunately out of time, my friend, but this is great. Actually, so your question is going to help a lot of people because I think they're a really good representation of how these things get layered on. So thank you very much for your question.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks.
All right, man. Have a great day.